Folks, we're about to get started. If you'd take your seat, please, and we'll have our first group of speakers come up to the front table. Thank you.
Good morning, and if the head table, let's see, the high-level speakers could kindly please come to the head table, that would be fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name is Millie Garcia-Serrano, and I serve as the Director of MassDEP Southeast Regional Office. It's a distinct honor to welcome you to this first-of-its-kind commemorative event, bringing us together perhaps for the very, very first time since the catastrophic oil spill of April 27th, 2003. To reflect on the day that changed the course of the history for all of our Buzzards Bay communities, its environment, and as we reaffirm, the day that changed the complexion of our state spill response, cleanup, and restoration program. But before we get started, I really want to make sure that we thank everyone who made this symposium possible. So first, Mass Maritime Academy. Thank you so much to Alexa, Carol, Sean, and David. Without you, we would not be here today enjoying and getting together in this beautiful, beautiful building. Also, our partner agencies, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, NOAA, Rhode Island DEM, and the U.S. Coast Guard. NUCA Research and Planning Group, and all the photography that was given to us by all of the partners, but going back to NUCA, especially Sam and Mike and Elise. And then, of course, the Bouchard B120 Organizing Committee at MassDEP, Kathy Kiley, Edmund Coletta, Elizabeth Callahan, Fabienne Alexis, Julie Hutchison, Michelle Craddock, and so many more that actually participated and had a hand in today's event. So, what was initially believed to have been a potentially manageable spill, as recorded at 5:52 p.m. on a very, what it would be and would change, uneventful Sunday afternoon by then emergency responder for MassDEP, Mike Moran of the Southeast region, very soon became an extraordinarily significant large-scale response. Larger than what we had ever trained for, and honestly firsthand ever witnessed by way of size, scope, and complexity. The Bouchard 120 oil spill would be the one that would actually test our internal and external capabilities and our ability to pivot quickly and assemble the man and women power necessary to assess the situation and mobilize unified response. Deliver rapid and intelligent communications up and down the chain across, especially in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and across our sister state, the state of Rhode Island. And finally, it would be the one that would test how well we informed our decision makers so that they had the right information to make the right decisions to respond to this catastrophic event. And guess what? We did it. Many of us know where we were when we were notified about the spill. I know exactly where I was when I got the call from then ER Section Chief Rich Packard. Serving as Deputy Regional Director at the time, I just could tell by Rich's voice. And then I said to myself, is this the big one? And in my role overseeing the Bureau and the Southeast operations, all I could think about was, is this the equivalent to is this gonna be the Northeast Exxon Valdez spill that happened in 1989? Did we train for this? Are we ready for this? And if we're not, here we go. Over 50 individuals just from the Southeast region were mobilized to support any and all unmanageable roles. From administrative to press to legislative to regulatory, there was a role for everyone who wanted to participate. And so today, we fast forward 20 years later and gather to celebrate and speak as one voice as it pertains to the partnerships and the collective efforts that took place between all of the core agencies that worked so seamlessly at the time. From successful cleanup restoration, we got it done. But most importantly, today is a day to honor the many men, women, and children, volunteers from all of the 10 Buzzards Bay communities and beyond, to all the nonprofit organizations, the elected officials, the residents who chose to act as opposed to stand still and allow for the spill to further injure our precious resources or allow the spill and the oil to impart irreversible damage in our environment. And so today, it's my privilege to introduce to you 5 of the brightest professionals that I know in the spills prevention and response arena. As you will hear, these individuals also have memorable and very similar and perhaps nuanced or pointed recollections of what happened on that fateful Sunday, April afternoon. And despite all that, I'm in awe for how we came together as a community of professionals successfully to overcome the catastrophic spill effects. 20 years later, we know now that we can turn to unified response. And again, as we know, this is a community that comes together, and I am just thrilled to be here with the brightest in the field. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, I would like to introduce Mr. Gary Moran, MassDEP's Deputy Commissioner for Operations and Environmental Compliance. Gary oversees MassDEP's operations across the state to ensure clean air, clean water, the safe disposal of hazardous materials, and the timely cleanup of waste sites. There's an expanded bio for all of these bright individuals, which I really encourage you to take a look at. But for now, Gary, if you could kindly come to the podium, it'd be my pleasure.
Thank you, Millie. And when she mentioned the 5 experts in the field of spill prevention, I was looking down the table here, and I only see 4. I'm certainly not an expert in spill prevention, but I've certainly relied on the experts for years in different positions I've had at DEP. I've served as Chief of Staff, a Deputy Commissioner for Operations, Southeast Regional Director. I came in shortly after the Buzzards Bay spill and certainly familiar with the response later on. It's great to be here with you all this morning and in a great facility as well, but also here to remember really what was a terrible incident, but to also celebrate how far we've come in the last 20 years in terms of oil spill prevention and preparation. As Millie mentioned, on April 27th, 2003, MassDEP's Commissioner's Office, the Secretary of Environmental Affairs, we started getting messages that something had happened. A barge had hit something in Buzzards Bay and appeared to be a significant spill happening in the bay. Now, Millie had mentioned communicating to senior agencies and officials, and we regularly receive incoming reports about significant incidents, spills, fires, et cetera. But as the additional information started coming in that night, it became clear that this was beyond really almost any significant incident we dealt with. This was a major spill in the bay, and the oil was heading towards the shoreline and the communities down here. At the time, I was actually on a bit of a sabbatical from DEP, but I was helping the new Secretary of Environmental Affairs that had come in with the Romney administration and her staff during the transition. And I remember at the time, as the information's coming in, people asking, well, what do we do in these situations? Is everything being done right? And it was a really hard question to answer at that time because this really was unprecedented, certainly in my memory of events. So in retrospect, at least the limited feedback I was able to give them, I think, was probably the best advice I could have at the time, which was, at a time at an incident like this, trust and rely on your first responders. And fortunately, that's what they did to a large degree. So MassDEP's emergency response team then went to work with the Coast Guard to set up the unified command structure at Joint Base Cape Cod, Mass Military Reservation at the time. And it ended up being an incident that was going to dominate our work, a lot of other people's, for months ahead. I know we'll talk a lot more about the spill and the aftermath from other panelists today, but just to sort of maybe provide the initial overview, and again, I think we'll hear more, but the B-20 barge was transiting Buzzards Bay, south of Westport, carrying 4 million gallons of number 6 heavy fuel, heading toward the Cape Cod Canal and the Sandwich Power Plant when it hit the rocky outcropping and tore the 12-foot hole in the hull. 98,000 gallons started spilling out and began washing up on 100 miles of shore of Massachusetts, Inward Island, and it quickly became clear that this is one of the largest oil incidents in this area, in these waters. The Unified Command was set up at JBCC, and DEP, the Coast Guard, and representatives from Buzzards set out to start figuring out how to assess the spill, even how to marshal the resources we would need to respond. Leading the way for DEP was Bob Donovan, at that time our Director of Emergency Response, and as Millie mentioned, Rich Packard, our Chief of Emergency Response in the Southeast Regional Office at the time, who I know you'll be hearing from in a later session. And again, as Millie noted, they needed manpower to assess the situation. Fortunately, we were able to bring DEP responders, first responders from across the agency, as well as a lot of other staff to help out and assess the situation, get a better idea of how the oil was impacting the shoreline and the birds and the wildlife. I know a lot of people remember the pictures at the time, hundreds of people in Tyvek suits spraying down the dark material off the rocks, picking up oil-soaked rack that littered the sands along Buzzards Bay. And people still talk about it if they were out there at the time, just the overwhelming smell of oil as it came in, washed ashore. Hundreds of birds were killed, also injured fish, shellfish, other aquatic life, prompted restrictions on beach access, shell fishing all around the bay. And the economic impacts and livelihoods, the impact on the economy in the area, the livelihoods of the people in the area were also significant due to this spill. In the end, we spent over $37 million on cleanup actions. And as the cleanup started to move along, MassDEP, the Romney administration, and certainly local legislators started working on developing the Marine Oil Spill Prevention and Response Act, MOSPRA, which was signed into law by the governor in 2004 alongside New Bedford Harbor. And MOSPRA really has become a wide-reaching program. It looks forward on how we facilitate spill protection and prevention and brings a lot of much-needed resources to the communities on the coastlines who are the first responders in these incidents. With the implementation of MOSPRA, one of the big things we've seen is the fully stocked oil spill trailers with a lot of coastal communities. I think we have one of those here today. People will be able to see out in the back parking lot. DEP was also able to start the holding first responder training and geographic response strategy testing exercises, where a significant number of local harbor masters, firefighters have received classroom training, on the water training, to help respond quickly to a spill and protect the sensitive local natural resources and habitats. And another key factor was it was through MOSPRA we were able to support the requirement that a tugboat accompany all barges transiting or carrying oil through Buzzards Bay to make sure that they didn't stray off course and cause another catastrophe. And lastly, just note that once the cleanup was completed, everyone turned their attention to repair and restoration of the resources damaged by the spill. Ultimately, Buzzards paid $19.3 million in natural resource damages, funds going to help the injured bird species as well as the injury to the shoreline and other habitats. And these NOAA restoration projects really have made a difference along the south coast and the islands, and the projects are continuing today, so I know we'll hear more about those later on as well. So bottom line is the spill, the Buzzards B-120 spill had a major impact on the environment, the economy, and really the way of life for a lot of people here in Buzzards Bay for a while. But the work accomplished after the spill really tells a different story, and that's one I hope we talk about today, which is the perseverance of the people in dealing with the response, innovation in creating new ways to train and prepare the responders, partnerships, and successes. And it's really, those are topics that are really worthy of recognizing and discussing today. So I'm happy to join you all in that discussion. And again, just on the first responders, where we have so many in the room who have doing it now, done it in the past, just a special thank you. This was a major incident that really reinforced the importance of the work you do, the preparation, the training. And again, this is a major one, but we see it regularly. The first thing this morning, we're getting calls about a unfortunate fire at a chemical facility in Newburyport. We've been dealing with the Clean Harbors fire. And people, sometimes it takes the unfortunate circumstances to really reinforce the importance of the work you do. So I want to say a special thank you for that. So thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Appreciate your words and all those highlights, very important. Next, I'd like to bring to the podium Captain Clint Prindle. Captain Prindle has served in the U.S. Coast Guard for 25 years, and he is currently the U.S. Coast Guard Sector Commander, Sector Southeastern New England. As captain, he directs all Coast Guard missions across Rhode Island, Southeast Massachusetts, Cape Cod, and the islands of Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, and Block Island. Please come to the podium, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for having me here today. It's wonderful to see some friendly faces, some familiar faces, and some new faces. But good morning, and a special welcome to the distinguished group of my colleague presenters for speaking this morning. I'm really interested in what you have to say, and Gary, thanks for the wonderful presentation. Thank you to our partners of MassDEP for including us in this event, to the Buzzards Bay Coalition, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and NOAA. I'm so proud to be joined by this group of professionals who are each truly passionate about the work they do. Thank you all for being here. I also understand that many of the folks who responded to the B-120 grounding and spill are also here in the audience, so welcome and thank you for attending. I am Captain Clint Prindle, Commander of Sector Southeastern New England, and I'm the current Federal On-Scene Coordinator for South Coast, the state of Rhode Island, and the islands and Cape. I have the express privilege of wearing many different hats for the Coast Guard, including the Federal Lead for Maritime Security, Search and Rescue, and Marine Safety. The Marine Environmental Response Mission, however, has opened my eyes to the true value of trust, coordination, and collaboration, both during steady state, non-crisis operations, and during times of disaster. April 2003, I was stationed in Florida, so in preparation for this event, I had to take the opportunity to go through some of our historical records of the B-120 spill 20 years ago. And I thought I would share with you some of the challenges we faced during the response and the lessons we learned as a group. I'll share some of this with you, and I hope that you'll find that while there is still much to be done to ensure our coordinated future responses are quick and efficient, we have in fact adopted many of the hard-learned lessons from 20 years ago as we responded to an estimated 100,000 gallons of number 6 fuel oil. Following the response, we came to identify that we could have done things a little bit differently. We found that our initial notifications between the federal, state, and local elements could have been faster and more efficient. We found that some of our pre-positioned equipment was not working quite to the level that we would have liked, and we needed more regular maintenance to ensure that it was ready when we needed it most. We also found that many technological and access issues at the Unified Command Post at the Coast Guard Air Station Cape Cod on Joint Base, and we identified the need to continue to improve upon joint training between all of our partners. Those takeaways don't seem much different from pretty much any other incident. We know that there will always be ways to better communicate and have better technology for any response in any environment. I would hazard to guess that the next time we run into a burning building together, We'll look back and say we could have coordinated better, communicated better, and deserved better gear. We must continue to hone our edge and address those issues. But what did we do well? And why is the B-120 coordinated response something to reference, something to remember, and to commemorate now and in the years to come? We are here because the response to B-120 was massive, formative, and largely successful. During the initial phase in April and May of 2003, we deployed more than 600 response personnel to the incident as oil washed upon our shorelines from Little Compton, Rhode Island, to Hoppy's Landing, to Falmouth, to the Elizabeth Islands. We deployed 15 shoreline cleanup and assessment teams across nearly 100 miles of shore. We quickly stood up a unified command post and a joint information center at Air Station Cape Cod, shifted to these very grounds here at Mass Maritime, and finally to Mattapoisett Fire. We had folks working out of Marine Safety Detachments New Bedford and Cape Cod. By the 4th of May in 2003, just a week following the initial spill, our Coast Guard overflights reported significant improvement of contaminated shorelines in Buzzards Bay, thanks to all the folks who sprung into action on that late afternoon in April. During the outset, we protected 15 sensitive sites with protective booming and prevented those areas and species from what could have been significant contamination. We threw everything we had at cleaning and monitoring, including all-terrain vehicles, bucket loaders, trucks, and miles of boom. As the response wore on, we rehabilitated oiled wildlife and monitored the presence of threatened and endangered species, all while ensuring the safety of each responder spread across the south coast of Massachusetts and Cape Cod. We held an open public outreach event describing the response and our planned efforts, addressing over 250 community members and the media. As we commemorate 20 years since the grounding of the oil spill, I give thanks for our partners who have worked tirelessly over the last 2 decades to restore and preserve Buzzards Bay and the impacted shoreline of the South Coast. The South Coast is better for your collective efforts. Thank goodness that events like the B-120 grounding are infrequent. I hope that the response, cleanup, and the restoration over the past 20 years is the last for all of us. Of course, the truth is there will be another crisis. So while we look back to remember, learn from, and aim to prevent events like the B-120 disaster, we must also prepare together to be always ready to attack with fury the spills of tomorrow. And that is why we are here today. Thank you again for your presence, your passion, and your expertise. God bless.
Thank you so much, Captain. I really appreciate the fact that you compared and contrast and lessons learned, which can only make us stronger and make this situation turn into a model for across the nation, state, territories, and even internationally, shall I say. So thank you very much for that perspective. Next, we have Mr. Mark Rasmussen, President of the Buzzards Bay Coalition. Mark has been a friend of the MassDEP and has been the president and CEO of the Buzzards Bay Coalition since 1998. Prior to joining the coalition, Mark worked as a guest student at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and a regional planner for Buzzards Bay National Estuary Program. So with that, I'd like to welcome Mark to the podium.
Thank you, Millie. Good morning, everybody, and thanks to the panel for great remarks so far. I think we are looking forward to a great day of learning and reflection on this event. And thanks to MassDEP for thinking of doing this. This is you didn't have to do this, but bringing us all together, I think, is really important. So thank you to DEP for this. I'd love to start out with a little bit of. There's so many familiar faces in the room, and I haven't had a chance to say hi to everybody yet, of course. But I'd love to know a couple things about who came today. So how many of you in the room were there for the incident? You were there in April and May of 2003. And how many of you come on since the spill in all the response, NRD, other work? everybody else. So about half and half. It is amazing how this community has held together the people who were involved in the spill at the very beginning. So Buzzards Bay Coalition, we were the designated volunteer coordinator in the event of a spill here. I'll tell a little bit about how that happened, how our roles changed during the spill, and then maybe just a couple of our biggest takeaways from what we learned in this spill. So I think first off, the most obvious, maybe doesn't even need to be stated, but this spill fundamentally changed our organization in every single way. For those of you that don't know us, we're a regional nonprofit. We were founded in 1987. We were very young when the B-120 happened. We work in science, land conservation, advocacy across all of the Bay region. Today we're 35 staff, thousands of acres of nature reserves, multiple facilities. At the time, we were 4 people struggling to meet payroll in a musty basement space in New Bedford. This was not a powerhouse nonprofit the Coast Guard was bringing on board for this spill. And they entrusted a lot of responsibility to us. What I think is mostly remarkable, and I'm sure you all share the same perception, it's amazing we all pulled this off because we were all in high school at the time, right? It seems we were all very young. So about our roles in the incident, they actually started 2 years before the event at an area committee meeting. And so a credit to the Coast Guard for pulling people together for area committee meetings. Rich Packard had the idea that there should be a designated volunteer coordinator for Buzzards Bay during a spill. So thank you, Rich. That meant that the day I got the call and was asked to show up at the command center, I had a letter signed by DEP, and I thought I was gonna have to go down to the base and push my way in with my letter to get on board, but I was actually on the list at the gate. We showed up that day and we started with the incident, ready to be a volunteer coordinator. Figuring out what that meant in the days to come would be a huge challenge. I think of the advice I was getting from Steve Lehman at the time. We wanted hundreds and hundreds of people who were responding to be volunteers in this event, and yet the first job of our role as volunteer coordinator was to keep them away from the incident. So it was both struggling with how do we engage people, how do we make them really involved, how do we bring value to the response, and not get in the way. That was a big challenge. I quickly learned, though, that my other job in this spill was going to be advocate, pushing for the best cleanup possible, and figuring out how that conflicted with my role as part of the incident command as the volunteer coordinator. That happened very quickly. The night of the 28th, the first night we're all on the base together for the incident, there's a press conference. I remember the first press question came to me during the questioning, and it was along the lines of, "You're the only one up there without a uniform. Are you satisfied this cleanup's going well?" We've been in this for a day now. Nobody even knows what the hell's going on. But the tone of the reporter was, we are going to look to you to figure out whether or not these guys are telling us the truth. It was a really uncomfortable position, and that position never really changed for us throughout the whole event, and really it sort of made it a challenge for us how we managed it all. I hope at the end we did manage those two roles pretty well, I hope. But as the cleanup progressed, we started doing other stuff. This spill changed every week. After the initial response was set up, volunteers were active. We then moved into a role representing the towns in the shoreline cleanup assessment teams. So months of walking every mile of the shoreline. I think Andy was there, Julie Hutchison was there, just walking and checking how is the cleanup going. Do we need to go back to spots? What's the new needs in each town? That was a role which really cemented our relationships with a lot of towns for decades. I mean, to this day, I think us being in that role, but that was again a different phase of the cleanup. Before Mike Popovich and NUCA came along, we were involved then in trying to create geographic response plans for the spill. One of the first, as we moved into trying to learn from the lessons of the response, to write them down and come up with better plans for each area. And lastly, a role that we never thought we would be in was legal defender. So, post-spill, and I'm sure we'll talk about it a lot today, after the cleanup had settled down, the political opportunity to actually do something in the legislature to make sure that this didn't happen again really opened up. So we became legislative support, bill lobbyist, bill drafter, and did a lot of great work with the legislature to write the 2004 oil spill law. But that quickly turned into a rift where we found ourselves in court for the next 12 years. Believe it or not, it's 12 years, two visits to the First Circuit Court of Appeals, 4 bills, 4 amendments, 2 federal rules processes through the Coast Guard, all trying to hold on to what Massachusetts had done. And now sitting on the opposite side of the table from the Coast Guard, who had joined with the oil industry in opposing Massachusetts law. So that was all, think about how all those things changed and how we all evolved. And I know everybody in the room has a similar story about how their roles changed throughout the whole spill. So I could talk about all aspects of all those things all day, you can probably tell. But I really just wanted to leave with what are my 3 takeaways. I mean, being asked to do these remarks, I had the chance to reflect on what did I really learn from this spill. And they weren't exactly what I thought they would be. The first one is I'm really struck by how much stronger this spill made our community, the Buzzards Bay Coalition, the environment of Buzzards Bay. A few examples, you'll hear about them later today in the NRD discussion. The penalty funds that came out of the spill, first to the North American Wetlands Conservation Act program, NOAA, second through the NRD process, protected more than 2,200 acres of land on Buzzards Bay, coastal acres. 2,200 acres were preserved forever on Buzzards Bay because of the penalties extracted from Bouchard. That's significantly more land than was ever affected by the spill, and that improvement in value to habitat in Buzzards Bay lasts forever now. So significantly stronger at the after that. As an organization, our relationships with the Woods Hole scientific community were cemented. Chris Reddy, who got very much involved as a chemist in the early days of the spill, he helped us build our science advisory committee of our board, establish our lab relationships with Woods Hole that last to this day. Town officials and legislators, we were forged together. The common cause that was surrounded around, we got to clean up this bay as best as possible, and we're not going to take second best cleanup for at all. We were going to get the best cleanup possible. That really brought us together with the towns and legislators in a way that lasts to this day. And with the whole Bay community, I think back to a lot of Saturday mornings that first summer where Captain Mary Landry at the time was eager to get out in community meetings. We were in the community center on West Island. We were in people's barns on Michon Point in Dartmouth. We were going around the bay, literally Captain Landry bringing the donuts herself and setting up these things in everybody's living rooms to talk about the spill and do public outreach. That became a hugely important binder together for the whole community that we still see today. The second point that I really take away from this, not just that the bay made us stronger, but the stress of the spill didn't break the cooperation that Captain Prindle was talking about. This cooperation that came together around the spill held together through a lot of really strong pressure. We were arguing, nobody was sleeping. Those first couple of weeks, you're not sleeping very much. The intensity of a spill response. And there's lots of opportunities where the thing could have broken down, and it didn't. I have to tell the story because I'm looking right at him. I think the first time I ever met Steve Lehman, so famous in this oil spill work, I was on our boat with Seth Garfield, who was behind the wheel. He's here today, too. We had Chris Reddy on board. We were taking samples in the bay, some of the first samples of the oil. I think we're doing great early science on the thing. And Steve's response to us being out there taking samples was, I actually thought I was going to be met by uniformed NOAA officers at the dock to arrest me and seize my samples. And the process of getting to know Steve, getting to know the NOAA support system, all the Coast Guard assets, was really important for all of us. Because in the end, I found myself at community meetings asking Steve what I should say, and then defending what Steve said at community meetings, and I learned a lot from Steve Lehman. But these things start in this intensity of that moment in a lot of conflict situations. Legislators, I'm looking at Tim Francis now. I was involved in more than one serious fights in a construction trailer at Hoppy's Landing on West Island with legislators that I would have guaranteed I thought were going to go to fist fights. They always seem to happen at West Island, and for some reason, because the oil kept on coming ashore at West Island, just wouldn't stop, it seemed. So there was a lot of tension there. The litigation was really tough again with all of our Coast Guard partners who we'd been so close with over all the years. But relationships like Ed LeBlanc, who's here today, those all held firm. We were literally drilling with the local Coast Guard crews on down here. On the same day, lawyers might be in court fighting the Coast Guard, and yet the relationship held, and that's really important. The last point is just maybe the most obvious one. The bay is much safer today after the results of this spill. The world in 2003, the night before the spill, 80% of the barges coming through the bay were single hulls. They had no local pilots. The pilot requirement was once in the last 5 years. There was no navigation route on the charts. There was no vessel monitoring system looking at where people were at. Every aspect of it was very Wild West when you look back and compare to what we have today. And I don't think the political moment to make the changes that we all benefit from today would have ever happened had it not been for the spill. So I'm thankful for the spill for that one reason right there alone. So so many people to thank you for, so many fun stories. that we could tell that I'd love to tell more of, but mostly I'm happy to be here to be doing this and look forward to the rest of the day. So thank you. Thanks.
Mark, I'm always so excited to hear what you have to say, and you hit all the points so beautifully. Thank you so much for really pointing to the real. I almost feel like I was reliving the story just sitting there, and in my mind, just, you know, that sort of day sort of coming together for me. So thank you so much to learn, and what better storyteller than you to tell us a story so vividly. Thank you. Now at this time, I'd like to bring to the podium Margaret Byrne, Ms. Byrne, who is the regional coordinator for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. She serves as the regional coordinator for the NRD, the Natural Resource Damage Assessment and Restoration Program, as well as the Spill Response Program for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in the Northeast region. She's worked in the NRDAR program for the past 10 years, and we're delighted to have you this morning. Please come to the podium.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the honor of being here with you today. I am Margaret Byrne, again, the Regional Coordinator for the NDAR and Spill Response Program for the Northeast region of the Fish and Wildlife Service. And I'm thrilled to join you all here today in celebration and acknowledgement of the restoration work accomplished by the Natural Resource Trustees of for the B-120 oil spill. We know that when harmful substances are released into the environment, local fish, wildlife, and plants can be injured, and the public's use of those resources may be impaired. Through the Natural Resource Damage Assessment and Restoration, or NDAR process, the public's use of those, the amount and type